My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
All right, folks, so I want to address the recent debate over Donald Trump and his video basically outlining his 2024 campaign stance in regards to abortion. And let me just start off by saying this. I know this video is going to be controversial either way, okay? Because whether I agree with Trump, which I'm going to just say right now, from a strategic perspective, maybe not from a principle or value perspective, but from a strategic or practical angle, I'll just spoil, I kind of do. Or if I disagree with Trump, people are going to get mad either way. That's fine. You're free to do so. You're free to disagree. My only challenge, because I know this comment is immediately going to come up, so let me just say it in the beginning, is that before you accuse me of being insincerely pro-life or insincerely Christian because I have this stance basically that we have to make incremental progress and be realistic about how we're going to get this pro-life thing done, then my challenge to you is this. First of all, listen to what I actually say in this video. Don't just go to the comment section and immediately argue against a straw man of what I'm actually saying. But two, and perhaps more importantly, if you disagree with my strategic approach here, then my challenge to you is to present an alternative. Okay, what is your solution to ultimately push to an America where abortion doesn't really exist? Okay, because I'm going to outline, and I think I'm going to explain how what Trump is doing is a part of that, the long-term strategy to, look, we probably all agree abortion is murder. We would like to see it just outlawed and non-existent overnight, but in the real world, in the game, in reality, okay, this is what it's going to take. If you disagree with me on that, present your strategy, okay? Because that's what we get very often is, I kind of call it pro-life virtue signaling, and I don't entirely blame people because I used to feel the same way, but as I mature and see more of this, I'm like, okay, let's also be realistic about this. Don't just virtue signal about how, we can't compromise on life, or, how dare you, suggest incremental change. No, don't just attack what I'm saying. Present your own strategy, okay? And if you're willing to do that and you have a viable strategy to say, look, here's how we can outlaw abortion in America immediately without any form of incremental change or progress or long march or whatever, I'm happy to hear it. I'm going to venture to guess it doesn't exist. And I'll just say again, hear out what I actually say in this video and why I think this is good political instincts from Trump. And this actually moves us in the right direction instead of just doing absolutely nothing about it, which I feel like very often pro-lifers get stuck doing because they just want to morally posture instead of try to actually achieve their goals, if that makes sense. Okay, with that said, here is Donald Trump's statement, and I will kind of tell you what I think. Here you go.
The Republican Party will always support the creation of strong, thriving, and healthy American families. We want to make it easier for mothers and families to have babies, not harder. That includes supporting the availability of fertility treatments like IVF in every state in America. Like the overwhelming majority of Americans, including the vast majority of Republicans, conservatives, Christians, and pro-life Americans, I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious baby. What could be more beautiful or better than that? Today, I'm pleased that the Alabama legislature has acted very quickly and passed legislation that preserves the availability of IVF in Alabama. They really did a great and fast job. The Republican Party should always be on the side of the miracle of life and the side of mothers, father, their beautiful babies, and that's what we are. IVF is an important part of that, and our great Republican Party will always be with you in your quest for the ultimate joy in life. Many people have asked me what my position is on abortion and abortion rights, especially since I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that all legal scholars, both sides, wanted and, in fact, demanded be ended. Roe v. Wade. They wanted it ended. It must be remembered that the Democrats are the radical ones on this position because they support abortion up to and even beyond the 9th month. The concept of having an abortion in the later months and even execution after birth, and that's exactly what it is. The baby is born, the baby is executed after birth, is unacceptable, and almost everyone agrees with that. My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart or, in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for your children. Do what's right for our country and vote. So important to vote. At the end of the day, it's all about will of the people. That's where we are right now, and that's what we want, the will of the people. I want to thank the 6 justices.
Okay, so we basically get the idea of what Trump is saying here, right? So first of all, he comes out and kind of defends IVF. He defends its availability. He then, I think more importantly, even there says that it's an issue that's going to be left to the states. Abortion is a state's issue. It's for the people in those states to decide. And very tellingly there, he also says it's going to come down to the will of the people. And with that, you could say he kind of takes a stance ultimately on abortion that is neutral or moderate, or it's more so, hey, it's not going to be within my realm of power currently, for the most part, as the federal government. Now, with that said, okay, I look at this at first glance and I say, well, this is actually good political strategy. I'll address the counter argument in a second, but this is actually good political strategy because you know that what the left is going to try to do in 2024 is make the entire election a bunch of fear mongering about abortion. Like, Trump is coming after your reproductive rights, which in all honest reality, as it currently stands, maybe this will change. I hope it changes in one direction. But as it currently stands, the federal government really does not have the consensus or the power to do anything about abortion. Trump will not have the power, whether he wanted to or not, to pass a national abortion ban. Joe Biden will not have the power to codify Roe v. Wade, and it's kind of at a standstill. So when Trump says it's going to come down to the states and the will of the people, first of all, I just want to point out that that's objectively true. Okay, you can argue like what you want about that, but that's objectively true. So why make an election defined by abortion on the federal level when currently the federal government cannot do anything about abortion? And as I'm sure we know, as you saw sort of in the 2022 midterms, and especially with some of these abortion referendums, it's sad. I don't like it, but it's simply true that the popular consensus is not really with pro-life at the moment, okay? You look at even some of these abortion referendums that are failing in deep red states, Ohio, Kentucky, Montana, and forgot the other one, just to be clear about that, then to me, again, I think it is strong strategy for Trump to just kind of stay out of this issue and not allow it to tank his chances of winning the election and doing everything else he needs to do. Now, with that said, I already know the counter argument, so before you even comment about it, I get it, which is the pro-life side will say, how dare you compromise on the issue of abortion? Don't you know that abortion is murder? How could you compromise on it? How could you take a neutral or a moderate stance? And they'll do this whole thing. And very often you'll hear this slogan from the pro-lifers. When I say, look, what he's doing right now is good political strategy, they will turn around and say, well, I would rather remain principled on abortion and win elections. You always hear this. Or than be not principled or compromise on abortion. Sorry, let me correct that. I would rather be principled and lose elections than not be principled and win elections, right? I'd rather not compromise, keep my convictions, and lose in the elections than, do the opposite and win. Here's the problem with that thinking, and here's why I would argue that objectively that is a false dichotomy, which is this. Okay, I know it feels good to say that. Okay. Yeah. You feel good at night because you're like, yeah, I never gave up on my principles. But when you really think about it in reality, that's just not true. It is a false distinction. It's a false equivalence, I should say, because objectively speaking, you cannot long-term or short-term stop abortion if you do not have political power. Because how else are you going to stop it? Unless you're going to go commit illegal crimes against certain things. I mean, what else are you going to do? So you can't, right? You cannot do that. You need inherently political power to end abortion. So if you do not win political power, if you lose all the elections because, we're pro-lifers, we're principled, you're not doing anything actually in the real world. You may be posturing, you may feel good about what you're saying, but you're not actually doing anything in the real world to actually stop the baby killing. Okay. So that's what I've always, said about this. But furthermore, okay, again, you're going to come to me and say that, how dare you compromise on this issue? Well, again, my response to that is, what's your alternative solution? Okay, because here's the way I see it. So we live in this current system. It's a constitutional republic, federal republic, quote unquote democracy. I mean, however you want to frame it. Okay, we live in the system where elections are linked to what actually passes as policy. Okay, now, in my defense, I am sometimes critical of democracy for this very reason. And sometimes people get mad at me and I say, well, that's an objective fact. Like in a democratic society, you're going to have to put up with something like abortion. But the way I see it, okay, this is the game currently in front of us. This is the system currently in front of us. And realistically speaking, if we want to do anything about abortion in the current system, it is going to take incremental change, incremental progress. That is the reality of pluralism, constitutional term sort of, pluralism and the system that we live in. And if you don't believe that, can anyone name me any movement in the history of the United States that just immediately got into power and overnight, boom, they got what they wanted? No. Whether you want to talk about slavery and abolition, we'll talk about that in a second. If you want to talk about civil rights, smaller political issues, free trade even, the Reagan Revolution, which did not start with Reagan, it started with Goldwater, prohibition, whatever you want to say, political issues you think are good, bad, whatever, LGBT, for instance, there is not one single political movement in the history of America that simply got what they wanted overnight. It was incremental progress. It was a slow shifting of the Overton window that eventually got them to where they wanted. I would argue the LGBT is prime example of this, right? We are now seeing what I would argue were always the end goals of that movement, but how did they start out? Did they start out in 1960 saying that we want to trans the kids, which I would argue, always wanted? No, it started off as, we just want to be treated equally as everyone else. And then it turned in, we just want to get married, and then blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, they're transing the kids. You could also maybe make the argument right now that the LGBT, kind of like a familiar thing here, is actually screwing themselves over because they're pushing too hard, too fast, and people are not on board. Just a thing to note out there. But again, the point here is that, it's just the reality of American politics that if you want to make change, it's going to take a slow, patient process. Okay? That's just the truth. And when you look especially at the current electorate, and by the way, this is not necessarily speculation, okay? The truth is that right now, the American public, even in a lot of red states, is not on our side with this. Now, do I like that? No. Do I feel good about that? No. But I'm also realistic. Okay, this is all I'm kind of asking to the pro-lifers who say we never want to compromise on life is, okay, so what's the alternative? Because either you can play the game and try to win the game, or you can sit out of the game and do nothing, which is, I guess, what these people want to do. But my alternative question to you is that if you sit out of the game and do nothing, what exactly does that achieve? Okay? Because I don't know if there's just this mindset here of, oh, if pro-life boycotts the elections for long enough, suddenly people will come to care about us. That's not how politics actually works. That's not how political movements actually work. They're based on credibility, okay? And again, maybe something like the LGBT movement on the other side is the prime example of this. No, getting small incremental victories builds credibility to your movement. It makes people take you more seriously. It opens new people up to your ideas. It establishes, especially in a democratic system, that, hey, these people have pull, these people have power. If you decide to sit out and boycott till the end of time, let me tell you this right now, what you think might happen is not going to happen. People are not going to start suddenly taking you seriously. No, they will see that, hey, this pro-life movement, they've lost over and over again. They are politically irrelevant. And ultimately, like I said, because you have no credibility, you have no victories to stand on, people are going to come to just abandon and give up and just not really care. Okay, so that's why I say those are the only two choices. It is a binary choice. Either incrementally try to make change or sit out and essentially regress, right? Because the more that we lose elections, the more that you're handing the total power of the left to just expand abortion access even more. And so again, that's my proposal to you, is the incremental route. You have to slowly make progress on this issue. And if you want to come and say, well, Donald Trump, if you're advocating for incremental change, shouldn't Donald Trump take a stance on this to pass that incremental change? To which I say no, and I'll tell you why. Is where do we currently stand on the issue of abortion? Well, let me just show you this right here, right? Abortion referendums in red states, okay? We're talking about the states' issues right now. Red states since 2022. All right, let's take a look. In Ohio, pro-life side lost 56-43. This is Ohio. Ohio nowadays is a R+6 to R+8 state on the abortion issue in a Republican state, lost by 13 points. In Kansas, here, hold on, let me actually shift it here. Kansas, another Republican state, the pro-life amendment there lost by 17, okay? In Kentucky, lost by 5, and this is Kentucky. We're talking about, what some would label the Deep South, certainly like kind of a solid Republican state. I think Trump took the state by 20. Even there, the abortion issue is losing, and Montana as well. Also, the pro-life side lost. And so the reality is, since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, every single statewide referendum on the issue of abortion has resulted in a pro-choice victory. What is my point in saying that? My point in saying that is, again, pointing out the incremental progress here. Why don't we start pro-lifers? Okay, before we demand that a presidential candidate, we're talking about a national candidate here who's, trying to win over the whole country and win over the swing states. Before we do that, how about we try to get abortion referendums to pass in, I don't know, say one Republican state, like one actually red state? Right? This is the problem, is how does that really make sense, right? Again, like I said, Trump is trying to win over the whole country here. Abortion referendums are losing in red states. By the way, I would argue to a large degree, the pro-life movement or pro-life organizations are not exactly doing a whole lot to mobilize voters and try to get these amendments or these referendums to pass, okay? How much ground game did we see for Ohio issue 1, for instance? Nobody even talked about it. Nobody even cared. But so they're not really doing anything to actually impact change. But when a national candidate comes out and says, well, because of this data we are seeing, I'm going to stay neutral on abortion and leave it to the states, the abortion people say, or the pro-life people say, no, that's wrong, right? How does that make sense? Like what are we really doing here? What is the strategy in this? And this is what I went out and said on Twitter, okay? I pointed this out. I said, abortion referendums in red states since 2022, as I pointed out, we lost. I say, do I like that? Absolutely not, right? I wish all these referendums would pass, but how can we expect pro-life presidential candidates when we can't even win in red states? What's the strategy there? Be real. Okay, be real. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of effort. And if we're not willing to be patient and put our heads down and understand, hey, before the Republican nominee says he's going to ban abortion, why don't you try to take a step towards banning abortion in a red state? Oh, even the people there don't agree with you. It's just the reality of our system. It's going to take a lot of work. I'm not saying it's impossible, by the way. I think if you, over a long period of time, slowly change culture, slowly change politics, right? I think if I don't think abortion is a standalone issue. So I think if conservatives win politically and culturally in other areas, I think abortion is intertwined, and arguably it is a symptom of the problems in America, not necessarily the cause. Then we can slowly shift the dialogue on there. But if you're not willing to put your head down and do it, then again, I would argue you are just virtue signaling, because there is no way under the current political system that a national abortion ban is coming overnight. So that's what I said. So anyways, we're going to continue. I know this is a long video, but I want to make this argument very solidly here. I thought my friend John Doyle actually put this very well, and so I want to play sort of his take on how, like I said, you got to play the long game. It's got to be a process, and just take a listen.
So I was saying that nationalism is going to breed the conditions necessary for social conservatism, for more Christian policies rather than the opposite. So it's to say that if we wanted to have a candidate running for political office who is just the most Christian, well, we would have had President Mike Huckabee by now, but we haven't, because people in America have become so calloused and they've become so polluted by sin that when they hear messaging like that wants to compel them legally to be more virtuous, it almost repulses them and they won't vote for it. I wish that weren't the case, but it is. But if you have someone like Donald Trump who can get in there and say, well, I want to close the border, I want to bring back jobs, I want to do this, and he makes, things like abortion an accessory to his campaign. It's like, oh, and I'm going to appoint pro-life justices, but he really didn't speak about that much. Well, he gets in office, and now all of a sudden he appoints justices, and that leads to the conditions that overturned Roe v. Wade. 50 years of pro-life activism, the crown jewel was we have to overturn Roe v. Wade, and the guy that ultimately facilitated that, not to discredit the work that the pro-life organizations have done, but it was the guy who, frankly, they were attacking in 2015 because they were like, well, he used to be pro-choice. He's probably paid for abortions, but it's like, that's true. But we need to get a guy in there who can move the ball down the field. And because we tend to be a more virtuous group of people, I think we have problems playing the game the way that the Democrats play the game, which is to say Democrats will say, I'm not in favor of that. I'm not going to do that. They will be creative with their presentation of what they intend to do. And then they get into office and they govern in complete opposition to how they said. Right. Is it wrong as say someone running for president or running for Senate or whatever, as a Republican, to say, well, my position on abortion is that I want to give it back to the states. I'm more moderate, maybe whatever. And then you get into office and now all of a sudden you staff your administration with radical pro-lifers and you govern like it's the Handmaid's Tale or something. You're saving lives. On the net, you are saving lives. And the problem with the pro-life organizations is that there's a lot of money to be made by getting up in front of a crowd of people and saying, I think killing babies is wrong. And everyone claps. Yes. So true. Like it's honestly, it's a form of virtue signaling on the right. It's to say killing babies is wrong and everyone claps and they give you money. Yes, but do you want to save lives? Because if you want to save lives, you got to kind of get in the mud and work your way through that system. And so my problem with Trump is a personal sort of, I wish that he, maybe had more Christian positions on these things, but ultimately, like, I'm not looking at him as a sort of avatar of, Christ-like behavior. I'm looking at him as a guy who can get into the system and create opportunities for guys who maybe are more inclined to be convicted and have deep convictions on these things to then get in and move the ball down the field.
Exactly. My thoughts exactly. Okay. And then that's very true. Like I said, sort of in the beginning of the video, which is a lot of people will come at us and say, no, but you're compromising. But let's be real. There is no alternative. Okay. These pro-life, like I said, I think it's very true. The virtue signalers, they don't have an alternative strategy to actually outlaw abortion in America or see that happen one day. All they want to do is tweet about it and complain about it. Okay. Now, look, if you as a Christian or something, you think that it violates your moral conscience to even vote for a candidate who takes a compromised stance on abortion. Okay, fair enough. I'm not saying that you have to do it, But I don't believe that that makes you as morally superior necessarily as you think you are, right? Because we don't disagree with you on the issue of abortion. What we're saying is we're trying to realistically, in this life, in this world, pursue the abolition of it through this long-term strategy. You're saying, nope, just not going to try that at all. Okay, but that makes you better somehow? Again, I don't really understand that. Okay, last point I do want to make here, because I know that some people will bring up this argument of the argument over slavery, okay? Because I actually think abolition and abortion are very similar, and you can make very similar observations about both. But there's a lot of incorrect misnomering going on with some of these pro-lifers that they don't understand what we are saying and what they are saying. So you have Seth Dillon, who I think is the CEO of the Babylon Bee or whatever. You know, I have no issue with him personally, but I'm just going to say substantively here, I disagree with him. You know, he responded to what Trump said here by saying the same thing was said about slavery by those who feared that outlawing it would hurt them politically, right? Basically trying to make the argument that, hey, was slavery outlawed through compromise and the moderating of stances, to which I actually respond by saying that's not a great example for your argument, because the answer is actually yes. Yes. How was slavery outlawed and abolished in America? Okay. I know you're kind of taught in maybe history class that, yeah, good old Abe Lincoln just came along and he won the election, and then there was the Civil War and he was an abolitionist. That's not actually what happened, okay? It actually, yeah, and by the way, okay, here, let me make this analogy. Did the abolitionists abolish slavery because in, say, 1800, they immediately ran a presidential candidate who said, I'm going to abolish slavery nationwide, and then he just won, and that was the end of the story? No. It is the absolute opposite of that, which is, for a very long time, you know, this was a slow, gradual push. Okay, it was an incremental issue, right? You know, over time, hey, you're trying to win hearts and minds. You have books like, you know, Uncle Tom's Cabin and stuff that releases, and hey, some people are moved by that. You know, there's all this pushing and pulling, the incremental progress of how the abolition of slavery actually happened. Now, one could make the case in an ideal world or an ideal system, no, you just immediately abolish slavery because it's wrong. But we don't live in that system. So I don't know what you want me to do about it other than me saying, here, okay, this is the game in front of us. Here's how you win the game. And then ultimately, even on the question of Abraham Lincoln, which I know people will say, bring up this, right? Well, it's important to note, okay, little known historical fact, I guess, Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist, or at least not publicly one. Maybe his internal instincts, one could argue, leaned in that direction. I don't know. But in the 1860 election, Abe Lincoln did not run on the abolition of slavery. He said he was against that. He just said he did not want to expand slavery, right? Look this up. This is true. That was his stance in 1860. And, you know, whatever debate you want to have about Lincoln or whether or not he's really the reason slavery was abolished, whatever. Let's just take their argument at face value here. No, he ran what you could call a quote unquote moderate or quote unquote compromise stance on the issue of slavery. And ultimately, you know, again, according to their view of this, that's how slavery got abolished in America. Okay? So if you're going to compare this to slavery, I would say that's a bad argument, because I look to the abolitionist movement and I say, okay, if pro-lifers want to win, then we have to do the same thing, right? We can't just abolish this overnight. I wish we could, but it doesn't work like that. We have to slowly have this strategy where, like John Doyle says, we move the ball down the field, you know? So I don't know. I just want to point that out because people will bring this up, and I actually think that it proves our point about this, which is, I mean, it is what it is. So let me restate. I know this is a lot of talking. Let me restate, sort of tie this all together. Again, why do I not necessarily have an issue with the political stance Trump is taking in the 2024 campaign on abortion? Because I'm a realist, right? Number one, you know, let's just be straight up. If Trump took any other stance on abortion, he'd lose the election. How do I know that? Look at how abortion has performed in elections, right? We brought that up earlier. If it's losing in red states, you can bet in swing states it'll screw him over. Okay, that's number one. So we're kind of stuck in that position. But number two, is it worth it to take a compromise stance on abortion to long-term gradually facilitate that moving of the ball down the field? My answer is yes. Why did I say that my answer is yes? Well, again, we laid out the reasons, which is that's just how change incrementally has to happen. Over time, you gain some credibility, you take baby steps in the culture, in the politics, in all regards, not just on abortion. Eventually, let's say a couple decades from now, we may be in the position where it's a serious question, can we truly outlaw abortion? But until then, we got to start somewhere, okay? And lastly, again, to the people who say that, no, how dare you compromise on the issue of abortion? My question, once again, is what's the alternative? Because if you just choose not to vote or you just choose to not participate in the system, by matter of fact, you cannot stop a single abortion, and you will only hand power over to the extremists who will expand abortion even more. So I just think that's the wrong way to look at it. With that said, folks, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What do you think of Trump? Do you think that this is the right message to be having on abortion? Let me know. And until next time, Alpha Moves Only. God bless. Have a very great rest of your day, and peace.